Good evening in the United States, good morning in India, and namaste to everyone around the world. My name is Sagar, and I welcome you to this webinar on yoga and media, hosted by the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. I would like to give a quick introduction here for our new viewers about what the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation is. AAYM, as it is also known, is a nonprofit organization for physicians, researchers, medical professionals, and practitioners of yoga and meditation, dedicated to education and research by fostering an approach by linking science, arts, ethics, and spiritualism to improve ways of human life. Today's webinar is about yoga and media. Digital media has been the common medium of communication in the modern world. However, spreading knowledge of yoga and meditation could be ineffective if it isn't done correctly over this medium. Today, we will listen to some very educated people in the field of yoga and media. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Arvindan Neelakandan, who is the contributing editor at Swarajya. He is also the writer and co-author of the bestseller book, Breaking India. We also have Ms. Christine Weber, who is studying holistic medicine and yoga for the last 30 years. She is also teaching yoga since 1995. Along with that, she has also been a newscaster for 5 years. We also have Ms. Anuradha Goyal with us today, who studies business innovation, travel, and Indic knowledge. She is also the founder of Indie Tales, a leading bilingual travel media portal. And our last speaker, Mr. Sri Iyer, is an author, an innovator, and an entrepreneur. He has made 37 patents in the fields of hardware and software technology and is a regular commentator in primetime TV channels. And now I would like to take the time to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Mr. Saurabh Srivastav. Mr. Srivastav is a chemical engineer and has worked in the field of analytics for about 20 years now. He calls himself a mumukshu that is very passionate about wellness. He is part of the coalition of Hindus in North America and plans to work towards his master's degree in yoga. He is also interested in all branches of Indic or Western knowledge systems. It is a pleasure to have all of our speakers today with us. Once again, I would like to welcome all of our viewers around the world to this wonderful webinar, and I will now pass it on to Mr. Srivastav to lead the webinar. Namaste.
Well, thanks a lot, Sagar. I really appreciate the introductions to all the speakers, and for myself, it's a great honor to be here with all these eminent speakers. For all our viewers who are out there, we'll be taking about an hour, a little more than an hour, to discuss the role of media, and especially digital media, in how the yoga is perceived, how it is being delivered, and how it is being propagated, not only here in US, but around the globe. We all know that we keep saying that we are in the information age today, and we have seen over the past multiple decades how the media plays an important role in creating the narratives, in setting the priorities, in setting the how people perceive a particular idea or a product or a service. Lately, as the social media has taken roots, and the entry to barrier is the entry barrier is getting lower and lower, digital media has started playing a much larger role than the mainstream media. We are going to discuss how the digital media, how the democratization of the information provisioning is going to impact, has been impacting, and what is the future for it as we move into the next few years. So with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Ms. Christine Weber, to talk about what her thoughts are on how things have progressed so far. She is uniquely positioned to talk about it as a yoga and holistic healing professional for last 30 years. She has been practicing yoga and teaching yoga since 1995, and she has been training yoga teachers since 2003. She is also a previous newscaster. So she is uniquely positioned both as a professional in the media space as well as a yogini to talk about how does she perceives the role of media as it has been for the last 15, 20 years and how it has projected and propagated yoga, especially here in US, and how does that impact the adaptation as well as the receivability of yoga here in the minds of the Western population. So with that, Christine, all over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here speaking with all of you and esteemed professionals in your field. I would like to start just by telling the story of my experience with yoga. So I had a social studies teacher when I was in 6th grade who had studied yoga. I'm assuming she studied yoga probably with Swami Sachidananda at Yogaville, because later when I learned more about different styles of yoga, I could see some of that in what she had taught us. So I was 11 years old, and every Wednesday after school we had yoga club. And there was many asanas, but she also did long yoga nidra practices, and she taught us meditation. And it was what is now known in the United States as hatha yoga. So, well, of course, hatha yoga is known everywhere, but in the United States, often when you see like a more traditional style of yoga, which typically will be like something out of the Shivananda lineage or Kripalu lineage. Often it will be labeled as hatha yoga, which is kind of interesting because when you read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or you understand about hatha yoga, and some of the other practices, the neti and basti and many of the cleaning practices with it's not hatha yoga, but it's considered a little bit more traditional. I have so many stories that I can tell you about so many things, about misunderstandings about yoga in the United States. But I thought it would be better if I just talk about my own experience. And maybe I'll put some of the other stories in there. But so I graduated from college. I got my master's degree in English literature. And then I went on to, actually, I wasn't a broadcaster. Actually, I was a journalist or a newspaper reporter and a writer. And so I spent several years writing for a newspaper in San Francisco back when there were newspapers in the late 80s and early 90s. And then, at that time I was writing a lot about arts, entertainment, culture. And that had been my interest as well as a literature major. And then I decided in 1991 that I wanted to go to Asia. And so I spent 4 years living in Asia. I lived in Japan for a couple of years where I taught English, and I was still writing a little bit for some, occasionally I would write a freelance article. But I was also studying a lot of yoga at that time. And then I spent another year and a half or so in Southeast Asia, but most of that time I was in India. And so when I was in Japan, I had met some swamis and swaminis and became interested in going to India and learning more about yoga. So when I got to India, I spent some time at different ashrams, many different ashrams actually, and doing lots of meditation and listening to many darshans from different gurus. My root guru is in Kolkata, and well, he lived there, and in Bihar. So my education, my yoga education became much more expanded. When I had lived in San Francisco, I took a few yoga classes, but there were only 2 yoga schools at the time, the Iyengar school, and there was another one, I don't remember what tradition. But at any rate, when I got to India, I started to really understand the vastness of the tradition, the vastness of the literature, and the incredible depth, the incredible wisdom tradition, this perennial wisdom that had been evolving in the subcontinent for so many thousands of years. And it was very transformative for me as a young person. In 1995, I returned to the United States. And I really didn't want to do anything except teach yoga and study more healing. I studied homeopathy for 3 years, and I was still writing at the time, but I really wanted to teach yoga. And very soon after I got back from India, I was still wearing Punjabis and everything because I had been so influenced by the culture. And very soon after I got back, I went to a yoga class. And it was a yoga class that was in New Jersey, but close to New York City. And the teacher had trained in what's called Jiva Mukti Yoga, which was developed by 2 dancer actors in New York City. And I was shocked. I mean, I had many shocking experiences. The first one was that the teacher came in dressed very modestly, just a t-shirt and baggy pants. But then she took off her clothes in front of the class and was wearing kind of a bikini and very short, tight shorts. And I remember being like, oh my God, the women I lived with, the Swaminis I lived with at the ashram would have just fallen over, not to mention, it felt so inappropriate to me. And then at the end of that class, the teacher came over and started massaging the back of my neck during Shavasana. And I thought, how can you touch me during Shavasana? It's not, there's nothing about this experience that was anything. I couldn't contextualize. I had no context for it. I couldn't contextualize it. It wasn't anything like the Hatha yoga classes I had taken as a child and even in San Francisco. It wasn't anything like that. It had completely changed in the 4 or 5 years that I had been gone. And so this is 1995, and this is when yoga started its ascension in the United States, essentially. So I had a lot of thinking to do, and I had a lot of sort of trying to more deeply understand what had happened and why there was this rift, why there was so much difference. I started writing for a yoga publication. I've written for many yoga publications in the United States. Started writing for a yoga publication in 2008 or 2009, I think it was. I had written other articles for things, but this was the first online publication I started writing for. And one of the things that happened was I started to understand that there had been a huge shift in journalism from the early 90s when I was working in the field to, almost 15 years later or so. And the editor would continue to ask me things like, could you please make the titles of your articles more sexy so that people will click on them? And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, you have to put sex or naked or some kind of word like that to catch people. So that was my first kind of shock with social media and with what had been transpiring, But to go back a few years, back to 1995, I think what was going on in the United States at that time is that yoga had started to be co-opted by the fitness industry, whereas earlier, as early as perhaps the 70s, the 1970s, 1980s, it was still considered very fringe and kind of a spiritual thing. It was maybe offensive to some Christians, but that all had sort of been sanitized by the 90s, and then it became the self-development fitness thing. And what I started to see, and what became deeply problematic for me as somebody who had struggled with eating disorders as a young person, was the depiction of thin, elite, wealthy white women as sort of the model of who is yoga and who is welcome to yoga. Not a lot of brown faces, almost never, and certainly no one with any extra body weight. Just the Vata body type was all that was allowed. And I remember one time, this is back in the late 90s, I was reading Yoga Journal, and the cover model was just looked like every other cover model of Yoga Journal, a thin white woman. And when I opened the page to look at the editor's note, there was a small picture of this thin white woman surrounded by the people who had been part of the photo shoot, who had helped do the photo shoot. And and when I looked at the picture, I saw all these very average, normal looking bodies with her body in the middle. And it became very obvious to me that she had some form of anorexia, or at least had an extreme Vata body type. So I can't really make comments about whether or not she had anorexia, but she looked anorexic. And it occurred to me that my brain thought that that was normal on the cover. And it wasn't until she was juxtaposed with more normal bodied people or more average bodied people that it appeared to me as being, deeply problematic. So, so this image of white women, the very thin white women, was perpetuated. And in many of the yoga workshops I attended and the trainings I attended throughout the years, and as I started teaching workshops and teacher trainings, that stereotype was reinforced again and again. So you have issues of class, of race, and of gender, all that intersectionality. I had several times where yoga studio owners told me I needed to lose weight. I wasn't getting the numbers because my weight was not good enough. I had studio owners tell me what I did was too traditional and it wasn't fast enough, it wasn't fitnessy enough. Many times I was turned away from studios for not fitting that mold. Nevertheless, I persisted, and I'm very happy to say that in the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a huge shift, and particularly with the Me Too movement, I think there's been a huge shift. I'm very excited to talk about this more with all of you, but I do see that there has been a shift and towards more diversity in yoga. One of the things that I've emphasized with my students is stop using the words modification for asana. We don't need to use that word modification. Instead, we can talk about variety and variations. Because we need to be very, very specific with our language. Language is powerful. Language is meaningful. We have to be specific with our language and use words that are about inclusivity. I think yoga has always been a very inclusive practice of, of course, there are times in history when it has been exclusive in some ways, but, with the Kala reform, there became this idea that yoga should be acceptable and should be practiced by more people, even householders. And so that's part of the tradition, and that needs to shift. And I do see some groundwork being laid and some changes happening in the culture. And I think those are very good changes. So I'm very optimistic. Nevertheless, the problem is that we have to undo what has been building for 25 years. That work needs to be undone. It continues to be perpetuated, specifically on social media. Instagram, I think, is one of the worst platforms for giving us this pre-digested, unattainable, and just basically inaccurate depiction of the tradition. So that's all I want to say as my introduction. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you.
Wow, makes a lot of sense, Christine. I think you touched upon a lot of good points out there. I think the point that you raised about this typical yoga person image that has been perpetuated here in US, I think has become a huge topic of discussion. I hear about that all the time. I see very few people, very less diversity in at least the known names of people who are doing yoga, right? So I mean, I totally appreciate what you said. By the way, I did not know that you spent time in Japan for some time. I did too. If I could, yeah, exactly. If I could show off a little bit of Japanese that I learned, Watashiwa, Kawasaki Kude Sonde Mashita Ichinen Gurai.
Ah, Josie
Well,
this
again,
day.
so this. So, well, I mean, very, very appropriate introduction, and I think it just tees off, a lot of the things that are happening in the media, especially here in the US. So, thanks for that. So, with that, I would actually like to invite our next speaker, Arvindanji, to talk a little bit about how he sees what you talked about here in the US. How does he compare that what is happening back there in India, right? And as Sagar said, Arvindanji is an associate editor at Swarajya Mag. He is deeply knowledgeable about these subjects. He wrote that seminal book Breaking India with Rajiv Malhotra ji. Arvindanji, I've read that book at least 4 times, if not more, and probably revise it every every year. So if I could bring you in and probably look forward to you to contrast or maybe even corroborate what you heard from Christine about what is happening in US in terms of how the yoga is being projected. Again, not to celebrate the diversity so much, not to talk about our limitations and how we overcome those limitations, but rather just perpetuate a certain, I would say, standard or expected image out of a yogi or a yogini. How do you see that? What is happening back there in India, and do you think things that are happening here in US
Tell me.
are impacting uh, that back in India as well? So I'll hand it over to you with that.
Thank you very much. And it's really a great pleasure and honor to be part of this August gathering. And I'm not very sure about my internet connection. So there may be some problem. And so, anyway, uh, talking about yoga in the Indian context, particularly the post-independent Indian context, we have to understand that the Indian mindset at that time, the dominant ruling class and the intellectual mindset of India at that time was basically uh, created by the whatever the Soviet Union was giving. So if you want to know how the narrative in India was getting set about yoga, you have to actually look at how the narrative about yoga was getting set in Soviet Union. As a lot of post-Cold War documents that have surfaced have shown, KGB had built a very wonderful model system of penetration in the media in India. So I remember as a child, as a teenager, when there used to be a lot of Soviet Union book exhibitions in the schools. Whatever school you studied, there would be annually some 2 or 3 exhibitions from by the publishers of books by Soviet Union. And one of the books that was very, very popular among the intellectuals and the youths at that time was a book written by a person called Vasily Brodov. And it was called Indian Philosophy in Modern Times, in which he had actually talked a lot about yoga. And in this, there was a preface. I will tell you how it gets set. In the preface, there was some 29 references. Of these 29 references, the 20 references were about the 20 references were from Lenin, Frederick Engels, and Karl Marx. So that is the kind of format in which yoga was fit, and he told very clearly in his book that yoga aligns itself. Yoga by itself is not a philosophy, and it aligns itself with the philosophy of the dominant classes of the people. Yoga misses out the fact, the truth that the Marxism has revealed, which is man is a totality of his in his essence. Man is totality of the social relations, and yoga does not care about it. So he said that some kind of breathing exercise cannot improve the health of the masses, and essentially it was meant for the upper classes. It's a kind of a luxury. It was not the need, it was a kind of a luxury. So with this kind of a format, the intellectual class and the ruling class, they saw yoga also as a kind of a luxury. It never went for the masses. Actually, the educational system should have taken yoga to the people, but yoga as a way of life was not taken to the people. They were, even when yoga was started, it was starting in elite schools. And because of this, what happened was, when the gurus from India went to West and the Westerners came back to India, it was all seen as somehow reinforcing this particular Marxist view. And hence, people started losing interest in yoga, except those who could afford. It never became, as I said, a popular way of life. It was not. It was cut off from the masses in the case of India. And interestingly, this is something that is never studied by the media. The media always, again, the media also projected yoga as being done by the upper classes. You know, if the heroine belongs to if she was the daughter of an industrialist, she would be attending a yoga class, those kind of things. Now, if you look at one particular area in which the media never bothered to look into, it is one big massive movement that took yoga to each and every nook and corner of India. Every morning, if you are going to travel throughout India, particularly in the 80s and 90s, you would find that in almost every village in India, there would be a ground in which some people would be doing yogasana and Surya Namaskar. Young boys would be doing yogasana and Surya Namaskar. And most probably those boys, whether it is Kashmir or whether it is Kanyakumari, whether it is Trivandrum or whether it is Calcutta, the boys would be wearing party shirts. So that was one organization that took yoga to the masses. What the government failed in doing, this particular organization did, and I don't have to tell the name of it particular organization. As I said, that was an organization of the party shirts. Now, if you look at Soviet Union itself, look into the media of Soviet Union itself, you find a very, very interesting developments. 1970, Soviet Union started working on yoga, researchers on yoga. Be actually applied to if there is a problem in the audio and video, I think I can switch off the camera. That way I can get more bandwidth. Is it okay? Okay. So, if you look at Soviet Union's the developments that were happening in Soviet Union, in 1970, Soviet Union started serious research on yoga. They even made a documentary called Yogis in India. The person who was in charge of these documentaries was Vasily Brodov, the same person who wrote a very demeaning book on yoga. And then what happens is this particular name of this particular book is Indian Philosophy for Modern Times. And then what they did was, in 1973, they started realizing that there is some very big problem with yoga, and that the yoga was actually clashing with the dialectic materialist philosophy of Soviet Union. So in 1973, the Supreme Soviet announced that yoga was a Trojan horse for Indian idealism. Nevertheless, a particular space scientist, his name was Jan Koltunov, he created a movement called Cosmos Movement. And this movement taught yoga, but they camouflaged it, telling that they were basically exercises. But if you go through the documents of KGB and all that, you understand that it was basically meant for teaching yoga. This yoga movement later resulted in something very wonderful, that natural childbirth giving movement in Soviet Union. And the person who writes about this during the Glasnost and Perestroika period of 1990, that because of this movement, there was from model of maternity care towards a more woman-centered psychological model of maternity care. So this is the kind of transformation that yoga created. So when Brodo told in his book, and which was accepted by all the intellectuals and the ruling classes of India, most of the dominant ruling classes of India, that yoga was meant for upper classes and yoga was not meant for the masses. Here is an example that in very Soviet Union, yoga created a transformation for the people. So this is the kind of the power that the media has in deciding our narrative. I will talk about more about this during the later conversation. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Arvind. I think that's a very fascinating input. I can relate to it. Growing up in India during the 80s and 90s, the influence of Soviet Union obviously was much higher. It's only about 92, 93 when the economy started opening up, and it took around probably another 5-10 years before the Indian population in general started getting a lot more information about what was happening in the West, in US or in Europe. So that makes a lot of sense. I think I mean it's we just keep we have a shorter memory and we forget that how short that particular phenomenon is. So very, very interesting. Thanks a lot for that. I think with that, I would like to invite our third speaker, Sri Ayarji, to give his opening comments. Sri Ayarji, depending upon how you look at it, Arvindanji obviously has brought in a completely new angle to it. I would like to talk to you about a little bit about how you see the media sort of influencing it going forward, but also while we are talking about the media, while we are talking about the democratization of the information, we cannot by any means ignore the influence that is there with the bigger actors who set the narrative. And in my mind, at least, that bigger narrative lies squarely with today, at least, with the government of India and especially the Ayush Ministry, right? What are they doing today? I know you have connections there. You talk to them regularly and you interview them regularly. I would like to, just ask you, what do you feel about what Arvindanji and Christine have talked about so far? But then, how do you see these big actors, progressing forward and influencing and propagating yoga around the globe? So I would hand it over to you for that.
Thank you very much, Saurabh, and it's an honor to be on your platform, AAYM, to share my thoughts about yoga. I hope everybody is able to hear me fine. I'll take that as a yes and continue on. I am what I would call as a fringe practitioner of yoga. I certainly can't speak to the depth with which Christine shared her thoughts. And what I would just like to look at is how yoga has become part and parcel of our lives. We just don't know it. In fact, you would be surprised to know that one basketball team learned the art of breathing exercises doing yoga, and then they credited that as a reason for them to win the NBA championship. I'm talking about the Los Angeles Lakers when Kobe Bryant was still playing. And they used to do like, I don't remember if it's 5 minutes or 50 seconds or something. They would sit in a circle. Everybody would have, you touch their fingers, close their eyes, meditate, and then they would start the game. It helped them to condition their minds, and it helped them to focus. And they won. I think they won back-to-back 2 or 3 times. So the yoga has been finding its way into many other places also. For instance, my wife and my daughter both are Bharatanatyam teachers, and our tagline for the school is Sampurna Natyam Idham Yogam. That is, yoga with Natyam, you get a complete experience of yoga. I should say Sampurna Yogam Idam Natyam. Well, the full yoga, when you do dance, you are doing a complete repertoire of yoga. And as part of their learning experience, children, when they start, like I think second or third year, when they are strong enough to perform some of the asanas, the teachers teach them this, and they learn this because, remember, that when the child is ready to go on stage, called as arangetram, which means ascending the stage, it is a solo performance of about 2 hours, and the child trains for it for 8 to 10 years. Then they ascend the stage, and for them, they need to have the habit of being able to control their breathing, because if you if you have seen any arangetram, and I'm sure Saurabh and the rest of the audience, you have seen some arangetrams, the child has to be completely fit, as brisk as on the first minute of her first hour to the last minute of the second hour. Typically, arangetrams last about 2 hours. Today's arangetrams are, I would say, still better than how it was 100 days ago, 100 years ago, because 100 years ago, the dancer also sang. The dancer did not only the dance, but they also had to sing while they were dancing. So this was the kind of effort that was required to enact Bharatanatyam performance. So this way, you are now seeing that it is getting more and more as part of our lives. The other thing that we are seeing more and more is in many workplaces, they have either around lunchtime or sometimes at the beginning of the workday, a session where you can just go to like a meditation room, just sit there, calm your nerves, try to see if you can focus your thoughts, and then come out and do it. Go about your work. What happens is, performing these simple exercises of yoga helps you focus our thoughts. When I say focus our thoughts, let me give you an example. On an average day, a human being gets 40,000 thoughts. 40,000 thoughts. Now, with that, the person is still able to perform to a certain extent. Imagine if the number of thoughts can be reduced to, say, 10,000. Imagine the amount of focus that the person would be able to bring when he starts being able to think less, but focus more on what that person is doing. So this way, yoga, when practiced properly, of course, under the guidance, can take you to higher and higher levels of realization. There is also the chakras, and I don't want to go in too much into details, but because the main thing I want to talk about is how yoga also gets appropriated or misappropriated sometimes as being something that is not part of Sanatana Dharma. And this is where I kind of disagree, because if we cast our mind back, who was the first yoga teacher? It was Lord Shiva. And who were the first set of students? The Sapta Rishis. So this is something that, like everything else, yoga is completely tied in with the Sanatana Dharma. It is very difficult in India to try and say, okay, this has to be looked at separately. Don't mix it with something else. It's in there. You will see many people meditating and also typing or having a conversation sometimes. It is very interesting when you see they'll be meditating by counting beats, like the 108 beats, and also having a conversation on the phone or on the like a Zoom conference call. So as far as yoga's dissemination is concerned, in the West, I mean, like the Western Hemisphere, it started out as something that was exotic. It started out as something where you could, come to a gym and do yoga. You do some simple asanas. Depending on how far you learned, you started doing more and more. But the trend kind of caught on, I think, in the last 20 years or so, because, you had, once you start seeing, commercial brands saying yoga pants, then you know that a certain thing has arrived. And I think yoga pants kind of brought in this thing to common, dialogue, and people started really associating. Are you doing yoga? Oh no, I'm not. And so this is kind of taken on and taken on a life of its own. For the longest part, I don't think the Western media abused it or tried to cast aspersions on it. They were just not too sure about what it meant. But I think now people are beginning to understand it more. But I still see once in a while some left-oriented papers coming and running it down and trying to give it a sort of a, what you will say as a, unsavory image, or trying to say something that it is not. Primarily, yoga is your internal medicine, if you practice it right, then you don't, you can take care of most of your ailments yourself. For example, there's a simple yoga. I have not learned it, but I've seen people practice it. That, how we all get the cold flu season. There is a yoga where you can put a rope through one nostril and take it out through the other one, and you can essentially use that to clean your nose whenever you have the onset of cold. Usually cold starts around here, and then after that it gets into your chest and so on and so forth. So these are all simple things that you learn. If you learn yoga for a while, you will be able to tackle some of these problems without resorting to any kind of medication. Now, as far as the Modi government and its push is concerned, if you notice, last 5-6 years, ever since Modi put in the hard yards to get an international yoga day, it has now caught on. At least in India, I see it a lot more now. And more also is the fact that, again, I have to say that yoga can't go by itself. It also goes hand in hand with many other things. For example, now it has become more prevalent for people to go to Ayurveda ashrams, spend a week, sometimes 3 weeks. The 3-week is a full course, which I recommend for anyone who wants to try Ayurveda, especially for ailments that are difficult to solve using allopathic medicines. I recommend Ayurveda. That really takes care of your body. But that's a 3-week regime. And it really is, first week they detox you. Second week they do what is called as dhara. And then the third week, they bring you back to your normal thing, normal life existence, like tastes and things like that. Sattvic food to normal food. And during these 3 weeks, many of the Ayurveda hospitals now provide you, because the actual treatment is only 1 or 2 hours in an 8-hour window, assuming that you have an 8-hour window and the rest of the time is, relaxation. There are many Ayurvedic hospitals that offer you yoga classes for like 40 minutes, 30 minutes, where they teach you some simple yogasanas. And see, these are things that combine to make you even more healthier when you come out of the 3-week regimen. Now, the Ministry of Ayush, the whole thrust to trying to make Ayurveda something that India can export as a not just as a medicine, but also as a full holistic experience is something that I think is beginning to catch on, because I am seeing that, I am a practitioner of this. Every 2 years, rain or shine, I am at one ashram or the other, spending 1, 2, or 3 weeks trying to get better. What I've noticed is, as you grow older, some of the things start acting up. Your knees don't respond as well as they used to. You may have some rheumatoid related problems. If you played sports as a young person, you may have broken a bone or two, and they tell you that rain is imminent, because they start hurting even before a drop falls. So some of these incurable things where you have to just live with it, those things are kind of addressed in Ayurveda, and I've seen very good effect from that. And in fact, tendonitis kind of problems, Ayurveda is very effective. And again, so Ayush is really pushing to try and put a spotlight on this portion of India's heritage. And I'm very confident that with time, for example, many people may not know this, but President Trump, it is believed, was on Ayurvedic medication for a long time, until he caught COVID, I think perhaps when he was campaigning, or he was in the midst of company of people who may have been COVID positive. But remember that for the longest time, he was carrying on without having any trouble. And it is believed that he had a fairly extensive regimen of Ayurvedic medicine that he took. And but then this thing never comes out. And hopefully through your medium, it becomes now known that Ayurveda is one of those very effective medications for COVID, especially as a thing that will keep the COVID away. It's very effective. There are many things like ashwagandha and other medications from Ayurveda that help you keep COVID at bay. So you never let go of a crisis waste. And I'm hoping that some of the healthier living habits that our rishis had put down, our rishis had lived, are now going to become more and more the common thing. For example, now suddenly we see for the last 2-3 years, people are beginning to have their own vegetable gardens in their backyard, trying to grow their own food. There is also more attention being paid to what people are eating, and also there is a more realization that you need to be careful about what you do, where you go, how you interact, and so on and so forth. These were things that India practiced as a basic hygiene. I mean, if you remember, you would never enter the house without washing your feet. I mean, and then that was something that I did. I lived in a city, by the way, and even then I had to wash my hands and feet before entering the home. When I came back from whether it was college or school, you had to do that. Some basic things you had to do. In fact, my mom told me when she used to go to school, this is about 60, 70 years ago, that as soon as they came back, they had to actually shower, complete head bathe, before they could come inside. And that was because India had just come out of a grip of cholera, and this was the most effective way to make sure that the children didn't bring anything back with them from the school. So long story short, I think I see yoga and also other things such as Ayurveda, in fact, even astrology, Vedic astrology, all these things are going to start complementing each other, and you'll start seeing the Western world see the benefits of many of these things. I'll give you just a last thought on astrology. I have some friends who have been very accurately predicting the course of what's going to happen right through this 2020 crisis up until, I don't know, next year. They are saying that things are going to improve. But even as early as late July, things will be better until September. And then you have another crisis, perhaps a small one. And then next year is going to be when you're going to have a more predictable lifestyle. With that, I think I'd like to stop my introduction. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity again.
Thanks a lot, Sri. I think it was very interesting the way you brought up your personal experience. I think a lot of us would relate to that. Although as teenagers, as kids, we obviously rebelled against it, right? I mean, especially as you said,
True.
You don't want to do that, but it was probably our mothers, our grandmothers who forced us to do that, and what a right thing that was to do, right? But thanks a lot. I also found it very interesting what you said right at the end of your opening remarks about the Vedic astrology and other call them Vedangas, call them Eastern knowledge systems. How do you integrate them? How do you, as I like to call them, stitch them together, right? Use all the tools in your toolkit to provide a holistic experience, provide a holistic guidance for people to benefit from, right? I think that's something which is going to be the focus over the next 10-20 years. That's my humble opinion, right? I think a lot of research is going to go into that. Obviously there is a lot of deep research going into each one of these specific areas, but then how are you going to provide an integrated experience to the population out there, to seekers? I think that is going to be something which would become, at least I hope so, would become a major area of research going forward.
Absolutely.
I think we are all in for a very, very exciting journey over the next couple of decades, I would think, from this perspective. With that, I would like to introduce our fourth speaker at this point, Anuradha Goyalji. As I call her Anu, she's a dear personal friend. I know her for many years, as a colleague, as a mentor, as someone who I really respect. Someone who brings in innovative, very, very unique ideas, very original ideas every time I talk to her. So Anu, as I bring you in, I would again look forward to getting something really unique from you. But you have heard our other speakers. They have talked about Shriji also brought in a lot of his personal experiences. I would like to talk to you a little bit about how, based on your experience as a blogger, as someone who has written a lot about the spirituality, about temples, about what is happening in India, and I see you are very, very active on social media as well. So you interact with with people out there, and I see your sometimes back and forth. So what is your thought on where all of this is heading, and especially I would say as we are talking about digital media, as we are talking about democratization of information, and everybody and anybody having an opinion and having a platform to be able to amplify that opinion, how do you see going forward? It coalescing in a certain direction, and if you believe that there are actors out there, there are bigger influencers out there who can nudge it in one direction or the other. And if you do feel that way, then what we as the supporters and authentic practitioners of yoga can do about it to nudge it in the right direction. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Namaste, and thank you, Saurabh, and the rest of the team for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Uh, I'll start with my personal journey. I had not thought about it, but then I heard the other speakers, and I thought I'll just share my personal journey with yoga. So I grew up in North India in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and yoga was not a part of our lives. It was simply not a part of our lives. But thankfully, I went to a school where we had a dedicated yoga teacher, and we were taught yoga not as part of the school curriculum, but after school hours. In fact, I remember during my primary schools participating in all India yoga competitions, and I have, medals, a bunch full of medals that I have from my primary schools when I used to practice yoga and participate in these all India yoga competitions. I don't know if they still happen. I haven't heard about them in the media. So that was my introduction into yoga. But as we grew, the pressure of having a professional career, getting a job, then building a career took over, and I took the usual route of getting into IT, software, building a financial base for yourself kind of thing. And by the time I came back into the world where I was doing things which I wanted to do, which is essentially travel, read, and write, and the traveling which led me to know and discover India in a way that no university could have ever taught me. In fact, my book Lotus in the Stone is all about my journey of being a curious tourist to being a pilgrim, who now looks at India from a very, very different lens. So a lot had changed. By the time I started re-interacting with India, a lot had changed in India. People have, there's a lot more prosperity in the middle class. The lower middle class had moved into upper middle class. There was a lot of affluence. There was a lot of extra income, and there was a lot of stress. All of that put together, there was a lot of work pressure. People were working in two different time zones, especially because we were doing a lot of work with the US and all that. And this has led to, and there was also a fitness revolution happening at the same time. The fitness revolution can be seen on the streets of India. Even in the smallest village, you'll see a gym. In the bigger cities, gyms are both a fitness goal as well as a fashion statement. In the smallest of villages, you will see mostly men, but a lot of women also visiting gyms, or at least taking gym memberships. Yoga studios, I don't see as many. Yoga still remains a very elitist thing. A lot of upper middle class people do it. The only person who has taken it to masses and used media very effectively is Baba Ramdev. He's used the television media absolutely brilliantly to take yoga to the masses by speaking their language, by keeping it very simple, by keeping, by kind of nudging people on a daily basis to do yoga and do, to make it a part of their lives, or he became a part of lives for a lot of people. So I see him as one phenomenon. I see this elitist yoga as one phenomenon where you see these hot yogas and power yogas and this yoga and that yoga. I don't know how authentic they are. I believe they are not. But putting a wrapper around the basics of yoga and presenting it to people who are willing to take it, or people who want to use yoga for a very specific purpose, be it a weight loss or a skin glow or a sculpted body. So people who had a very specific goal, so there were versions of yoga that came up to support that goal. So there was, I don't know how relevant it is, but in the 90s, we had a huge weight loss industry. 90s and 2000s, we had a huge weight loss industry. That has given way to the gyms and the yoga studio. Yoga studios, I still don't see. I mean, honestly, I was speaking at a conference on entrepreneurship and startups, and I kept saying that we don't have a single yoga studio brand in India. We should have at least a dozen which have originated in India and gone global, but I don't see a single yoga studio brand that has been set up in India and which is known, which has an identity of its own. And I don't see an inclination for that. I am yet to decipher why people do not see an opportunity where I see an opportunity, a very, very clear opportunity. Because of that uh, brand identity being missing, or because of that organization being missing, yoga even today stays within the realms of a few yoga teachers in your neighborhood who may or may not be trained, or who may or may not be as qualified to teach you yoga. Uh, there are universities. I know there are at least a few universities in India who are focused on yoga, but then those are specialized institutes not available to the masses. Uh, uh, Yoga has definitely come back into our public consciousness. It's in our mind. We know it is. And it has mostly come through media, whether it is through the yoga classes which are online, or through the brand ambassadors who who created their own either yoga videos or yoga CDs to sell. But it has come back into the consciousness. How much of it is practice? uh, and practiced properly, that I'm not too sure. Because it's easy for me to look at the television and copy the poses, but I don't know if I may have a condition where I should do a certain asana or not. So those kind of conditions and those kind of the boundary conditions that yoga has, those may be overlooked when we only look at it from a very, very exercise regimen kind of a thing. And like the previous speakers have already said, that I definitely want yoga to come back in its totality, and not just an alternate way to exercise. You have 10 different types of exercises, including dance and including sports and including this and that, and then yoga becomes one of those. Yoga is definitely much more than that, with all its yam niyam and everything, which nobody is following. So which most people are not following, at least. So that is something that needs to be brought into the consciousness, and that's where I see organizations like yourself to work on it, on disseminating that information, and to create that awareness that to even get the most out of the exercises you do, there are certain other things that you need to follow. There are lifestyle changes that you need to make. So that on that, a lot of work is pending. Yoga Day is playing its role, but then one day in a year can do only so much. It can potentially help us claim it back to India. It can potentially serve as a reminder, but I don't see its role more than that. Ayush Ministry, Shriji spoke about it. For my newspaper column, just last month, I wrote a article on the Ayurveda part of Ayush, where I had actually questioned that in last 1.5 years, they have not really come out with something which can help us deal with COVID. And even if it's not a treatment that they have not come with, they could have very easily come out with something for the post-COVID care. A lot of people are suffering the post-COVID stress, post-COVID weaknesses. There's a whole rehab that is required post-COVID, and that's something that Ayush, in totality, whether it's yoga or Ayurveda or naturopathy or Unani, all of them put together, could have come out with something. So my expectations from Ayush Ministry are a lot more than what they are doing. They need to uh, work at 2-3 different levels. They need to organize it as an industry. so that they need to have the bodies which can deliver actual results, and they of course need to work on building the brand identity of these things and build trust and actively work on building trust. On yoga, at least people have a lot of trust, inherently people have a trust, but on the rest of the systems, uh, in the average mind, the trust level is very, very low. And the media, uh, and actively, there is a section of media which is actively working on demeaning them. There is active questioning of everything that Ayurveda does. There is active questioning of a lot of common practices. So we need to have a very, very strong media strategy to deal with that and disseminate the right information. Now, every time I ask this in the media and say, why are we not disseminating? I'm given one odd exception. Dr. X living in Y town has treated 10 customers or 20 patients of COVID. Why are we not replicating it if that is the truth? One, that needs to be tested. Second, that needs to be replicated. And third, that needs to be disseminated. If I don't see these alternate medicine systems as they are called today, I hope they become mainstream someday. uh, they have a problem of people not coming together, just like the medical associations come together, and they have a system of peer reviewing things and publishing things and putting things in the domain and kind of putting a stamp which gives a trust factor to the user. That system is missing. And now I know when you are inside a system, you feel, oh, we are doing all this. But I am standing outside, and when I see from outside, and I travel a lot in the nooks and corners of India. I mean, it's been long that I visited US, but in India, let me tell you, the trust factor is really, really low, and we really need to work on it. And media is a great tool. Media is a tool. It's like, Rahim said, lohe ki na lohar ki, kahe Rahim bichar, jo hani mare sis pe tahi ki salwar. It's a tool available to you. How you use it is completely up to you. And I think all the people working in these streams need to come together and use it very, very effectively. And you need to play a role of educating. And when I say educating, I don't mean educating the people who have enrolled with you to take degrees, but educating an average media person. Uh, all the organizations who have, or all the subjects that have come up, or who have got the right media attention, are the people who very actively, and believe me, I run a fairly reasonably well-read media portal, and the amount of information I get from people I partner with is immense. My mailbox gets 100 emails from anybody in travel and tourism space, even today when the travel tourism industry is almost shut. uh, and the amount of information they give me, amount of experiences they give me, for me to be able to write about them is amazing. And that makes my job easier. It keeps me aware, it keeps me connected to the industry. So you need to build, you need to build your own set of media people who are educated on what you're doing and what they need to disseminate on your behalf. So with that, I will stop, and I hope I made some sense.
You always make sense, Anu, but that's very interesting. I think I'll be honest with you. I've lost a little bit of a touch of what is happening back in India. I see what is happening here in US quite closely, especially in this area because I'm very passionate about it. But it was a revelation to me when you said that you are not seeing a lot of yoga studios, actually, especially in the smaller towns, right? I mean, I would have thought that would have changed with so much of
Not even bigger towns. Not even bigger towns. Tell me one studio brand. I mean, there may be one-off ones here and there, but tell me one brand which has even 10 branches or 20
wow,
branches.
wow, that's quite. At least for me, it's quite counterintuitive because if you see what is happening here in the US, I think you probably have a yoga studio in every strip mall over here, which would be like, like what you have pawn shops where back in
Right.
India, right? I mean, it's very very common.
Right.
Very interesting. So, well, I think thanks a lot for all the comments, and I really appreciate all of your thoughts. I would like to get in some of the viewers' questions at this point, if that is okay with everyone. So, Anuji, if you could bring everybody on screen, we'd get into the Q&A session for some time. One of the questions that we are getting, and I think all of you have sort of touched upon it, but in terms of the influencers, Baba Ramdev was mentioned, a few times. Anu, you mentioned some of the universities. Um, how do you guys think they are influencing the thought process, and how do you think sort of the quote unquote marketing model that they have put in place is influencing the landscape? So anyone can take that, and I think the question, the person who asked that question directed it to you, Arvindanji. So maybe you can go first, and then I'll let others chime in as well.
See, basically, yoga as well as Ayurveda, they are very individualistic. For example, there is Chavana Prakash that we get in Kanyakumari district. It based on the local herbs, and it is given to the patients based on the evaluation of the person by the doctor, adding, increasing, or decreasing a particular ingredients. That is how they do it. Now, if you are going to market Chavan Prakash and standardize it, and you are going to market it, it is going to lose some of its vital aspects, vitamin. It is no more. It is a kind of a mixture, hybrid between Ayurveda and corporatization. The same thing goes for yoga also. So when you are going to do yoga in a massive scale, then there is always going to be problems. So you have to, I think, reread our Alvin Toffler's Thrive and forms in which we cannot use Baba explorator. We will be learning from his his network around the world, and to emphasize a particular kind of
I think we are losing you, Arvindanji, but I think I got the gist of it.
is the most suitable, most cost-effective, most individualistic network, decentralized network for taking Ayurveda and yoga. We have to replicate that model in these sectors. Then we will be able to do something really positive and good.
Yeah, great thought. Anu, you.
Yeah, I completely agree with Arvind ji, and that, we have to go back to small is beautiful, local. These things have to be procured locally, manufactured if there is a manufacturing angle involved locally, and taught locally. Even the prakritis of people will depend on where they live and what kind of weather there is and all that. So yes, and that's why I'm saying we need these brands which are very very local, not something that is one size fits all and one pill for everybody, which is what essentially the televised model of yoga is, and that may be harming somewhere some people. It may be benefiting 70-80% people, it may be harming about 30% of the people. And
Interesting.
also they seem to say that, okay, one Kapal Bhati is answer for every solution. That's not true. We all know, right? That's not true. And I have seen people doing Kapal Bhati for 45 minutes every day without even checking with anybody. And when I tell them, they say, oh no, so and so is saying, how can that not be true? And
Right.
another thing what many experts don't realize is the power of television media. Believe me, I mean, there have been cases that I have found it difficult to convince my own parents that I am a part of this project and this is not the truth what you are seeing on television, because they think if it's come on television, it's true.
Yeah.
You could be wrong, you
It
know.
can
So
lead
if
to
I have
imagination.
not, yeah, so on many different things. So the power of televised media and power of media is so strong, it's very difficult to undo what people capture from media for an average person. You know, we in this group we may use our intellect to make our own calls, but an average person, for them media is the last word.
Interesting. So I would like to bring in you, Christine, over here, and followed by Shriji. But one of the things that I've been thinking here is that, yes, it is very individualistic. Yes, it has to be personalized. But at the same time, Anu, you brought in that point of what Ayush could have done. Maybe bring in some more new protocols. Provide solutions which could be used, and it's a great need of the hour, the post COVID care, right? But Christine, from your perspective, how do we get this balance between something which is very individualized, but at the same time has to be, in some sense, created some kind of a protocol, some kind of a standardization, so that you could then, portray it in the media or in general into the research papers that this is something that works over and over and over. Yes,
That's
you have
right.
to personalize it, but how do you then generalize it, right? I mean, how do you get that balance, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'm in the middle of a research study right now that we're doing at a state-run facility for drug and alcohol treatment. We're using my protocols for the first 2 weeks and people in to see if they have relapse, if it prevents relapse. And the problem that we come up against is exactly this problem. Yoga doesn't fit the scientific materialistic model very well. It doesn't fit the research model very well. And so you're sort of trying to squish this square peg into a round hole. And additionally, I'd like to follow up on what Ms. Goyal said in terms of, you have this mass promotion of yoga in the media by Modi and Baba Ramdev. And it's deeply problematic. On one level, it's wonderful, On another level, it's a little bit scary to have Hindu nationalism co-opting yoga. That makes me nervous. It makes me nervous in the sense of yoga has been traditionally practiced in other religions as well. You see vestiges of it in Christianity. You see it in Islam. You see it in Buddhism and Jainism, and then it makes me a little nervous. I think there are some good things that are happening, and I'm not an expert on. I pay attention to what's going on in India, but I'm not an expert. But I think we have to be careful. And similarly in the United States, and I want to speak again to Ms. Goyal's point about television as well as mass media. So, you have in India, you have Ramdev telling everybody to do Kapalabhati. Here we have Fox News telling everybody that yoga is the devil's work, So it's a similar problem when you have media produced for the masses and you have an education level that is not necessarily adaptable to critical thinking, and that's what we need as we, if we're going to try to move forward in any kind of meaningful way. So, I think that in the United States, we have a big issue with understanding the bigger picture of yoga. We think we stick it into the fitness box. That's the problem we've had in the United States. And reductionism is a problem of the human mind. So I always go back to yoga and say, what is yoga really about? It's about the expansion of mind and the shifting of the worldview. I mean, that's what really can happen with yoga practice, is that worldview can expand. We can start to appreciate other cultures, appreciate what we can glean from other cultures. I would love to see much more yoga in the public health system in the United States, for example. I would love to see yoga being used for populations. And so we can have some protocols, And it's okay, because that's an introductory level to these practices. Maybe, maybe it's a matter of evolution and human beings aren't ready en masse to really go deep. I don't know, but nevertheless, if we can give people some small ideas of what yoga, how yoga can help, I think that can be helpful. I think it's a problem when you say, when you're not aware of the contraindications of the practices and then you spread them massively. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, but I hope.
No. That's very insightful. Well, I would say, Shriji, I was not hoping to bring you in at a time when a word like Hindu nationalism has been mentioned, but there it is. You talked about, sort of the left liberal media demeaning some of these things. And here is Christine talking about how, the right wing media like Fox News also, talks about it being like, and I've heard that myself. I think we all have heard about the Alabama, state not allowing teaching yoga in the school, and now they are allowing it, but they are also saying you cannot say namaste, you cannot say om, obviously. So obviously it is pretty widespread on both sides of the aisle, or it's a wide spectrum kind of a thing. Before I come to you, I would just probably loop in one more question that has come in. And this is about, in the recent times, Indian media, print and digital is competing against each other to give quick yoga remedies on COVID-19, right? With no scientific backing on this information. Is it responsible of media to put this information? So you have on one side, you have the problem of people not taking it very seriously. On the other hand, you have the problem of a barrage of the information, and that sort of plays into the hand of people who want to criticize it. I know there are a bunch of things that I have sort of packaged them together. But what's your what's your thoughts on that? You need to unmute yourself, Sri. You need to unmute yourself. Sri.
Oh, you unmuted me. Thank you. I'm just going to read one paragraph from this book called The Dharma Yoga. This is written by Padma Bhushan awardee Dr. Nagaswamy. And this ties in a lot of things. And I'm just going to read one paragraph that he has written about yoga. Yoga is not twisting various limbs of the body that would give miraculous powers. It is pure and simple purification of the body and the blood through simple breathing exercises of mind and thinking process in a relaxed manner. An extraordinarily formulated scientific text is Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali, consisting of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The first two, yama and niyama, include the major part of the 10 qualities mentioned above. There is no culmination of yoga without dharma. These two are not restricted to any individual, sect, god, religion, caste, language, but are universal and for all people of the world. I hope this kind of summarizes what yoga was conceived to be, and that's where I come and say that yoga is something that you can isolatedly look at it. It is a mix of dharma also. I hope this kind of answers the questions that we have. If Fox News asked me to come and give a slightly different view of yoga, I think they should invite Kristen, as a matter of fact. She's such a great ambassador for yoga. And I'm sure it's going to happen. This is mostly because of ignorance, and somebody has a certain vested interest in peddling a certain narrative. That's what usually happens. But either ways, I mean, we have our dharma, which is to make sure that the truth comes out. Satyam vada dharman chara. Thank you very much, everyone. And it was a pleasure being on this panel.
Very nice, very nice, very nicely summed up. I would just take one maybe last question, and this should be quick. Is yoga prescribed as astrological remedy? How does it work? I don't know whether anybody would want to take that. It's a pretty,
it's an exotic thing. Yeah.
Yeah. If not, I would just quickly say that As far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of yoga being practiced as astrological remedy.
What
Yeah,
I would just add one thing, which is my understanding of yoga is it helps you to transcend your chart.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think as you transcend your, I mean, obviously, when you're getting into the samadhi state, you do cross all your karmas and all your sanchit karmas and all of that. Uh, the only other thing that I could probably add is that there is a branch of astrology called medical astrology, and that allows you to see what ailments you might have, and if you combine that with your yearly chart, which is called the Varshfal, I think you can predict. It could be a diagnostic tool for you to predict what kind of ailments you might be having in the coming year, and then you could use yoga as a remedial tool. But using astrology or using yoga as an astrological remedy, I've not heard that. I think you can use astrology as a diagnostic tool and then use yoga as a remedial tool. That is something which seems more palatable to me. I haven't really experienced it myself, but I can see that being a possibility, right?
So
So
I would say, sort of to that, they are all interrelated. You can use any one to as a diagnostic for the other and use other as a remedy. So it's up to these, both of them are tools, use them as you want. You gave a very good example. So I would say if something like your mangal is afflicted, then doing exercise is recommended. It could be yoga as well, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's up to you and it's up to the interpretation. And one final thing I want to say is that as a media, when you are talking about taking yoga to the media, I think we need to take the focus a lot more from the gross body to the subtle body. It remains on the gross body a lot. So if we can take in the media, if we can take the focus from gross body to subtle body, that would sort out a lot of problems.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's a very, very fascinating conversation. I really appreciate talking to all of you. I would actually, at this point, we are a little out of time, so I would really quickly invite all of you for your closing comments, if any. So please, maybe we can go in the same order. Christine, if you want to, talk about any closing comments if you have.
Mostly, I just want to stay on and chat with everybody because I'm so fascinated by this conversation. So I want to thank you so much
Me too.
yeah, it's been really interesting for me personally and so fascinating. And I'm very honored. So thank you for having me here.
No, thank you. Thank you. It was very insightful. Arvindan ji, any closing comments, please?
I just want to the conversation with the just in twisting the tail. The same way put so after Glasnost, he after the 5 years, he was saved and he was the old age of 78. And he came out with something. This is the kind of that narrative against in the respect to yoga. Even today, we are fighting.
All right, you were breaking up a little bit, Arvindan ji, but I think we'll figure out how to remedy that in the recording. So thanks a lot, Shriji.
Yeah, so I was thinking about why yoga is not taking off in India. So I just have this thing that somehow we have to figure out a way to make these three think of the three as three legs of dharma. One is yoga, the other is Ayurveda, and the third is astrology. Even the most atheist person in India, even the communist minister, will first look at when should I make what statement. He wants all the comets, rashis lined up before he makes that statement. So whatever they say, exactly. Whatever they say for public consumption is different, but internally they are always trying to make sure that it has the maximum impact. So if there is a way we can bring these three aspects, perhaps put it in a temple and say, when you go, you do have darshan, but by the way, if you want to look at any of these three things, there are experts to help you. I'm hoping that that kind of a renaissance happens in our temples, especially if you look at the southern temples. It breaks my heart to see how some magnificent structures are just lying and going into disuse. I hope that that renaissance happens, and I hope that this thought, because I can tell you for sure, astrology, everybody wants to know, what's in it for me today? Am I going to have a good day or a bad day? So maybe that is the hook that you are bringing in people and say, by the way, have you done your Shirsasan today? Have you done your pranayama today? Breathe. If you breathe well, you can think well. If you think well, you're going to make better decisions in life. I'm just, giving some marketing spiel here, but I'm hoping that somebody gets this thing, internalizes it, and then makes it into a thing that everybody can benefit from. Thank you very much.
Makes sense. Thanks a lot, Shriji. Anu?
Yeah, I just want to tell Shriji, I have a book called Lotus in the Stone, in which there is one full chapter called Beneath the Veneer, which brings out exactly what you are saying, that what people say for public consumption is not what they practice. And in practice, the dharma, the astrology, everything stays pretty firmly rooted, but what they say for public consumption is what they think will get them the maximum material benefits or something like that. So I have documented at least 10 such examples from public domain as well as from my own personal experience. And that gives me a lot of confidence that we've not lost it. So
yes.
Yeah, that's my closing comment.
Very nice, very nice. So thanks a lot, everyone. Very invigorating, very interesting, and enlightening discussion we had here. I hope we'll continue with that. There are a lot of ideas that came out from some of the speakers. I would personally want to follow up on some of them, and I would hope our viewers who are listening to it will also take some inspiration out of it and make some of these projects and see them to fruition. I think listening to it is one thing, but actually taking them to some kind of a logical conclusion is something that is really, really required. So I hope some of us will do that. With that, I would like to conclude this session over here. Hand it over back to our wonderful host, Sagar. You want to take it over, Sagar, and conclude it, please?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Saurabhji. Wow, what a great webinar. I mean, all of our speakers such great insight on how the media relates with yoga. Miss Weber, I like the different encounters you had and the experiences, how you got into yoga and how you learned from each of the different swamis and the swaminis. And I also liked how you explained that you completely felt displaced when you came from the Indian culture to the American culture, and how America gave the interpretation of yoga and how that compared with India and how that was so shocking to you. Mr. Neil Kandan, I mean, although you weren't that audible, I think a lot you gave the great example of how India started to learn more about US and how US started to learn more about India. And Mr. Iyer, I really like the Bharatanatyam example that you gave us and how yoga is getting more into our lives. And I also can't believe that each of us get about 40,000 thoughts per day. I mean, that's mind-boggling. And Miss Anuradha-ji, I would like to give you that acknowledgement of the great example of the whole 90s weight loss era, which you told us about, and how you explained how yoga should be more prevalent throughout not only India, but US too. Finally, Saurabhji, great moderation. I liked how you tied in everything that each of the speakers said and how you gave a little bit of your own insight about each of the different questions all of the viewers asked us. With that, I would like to thank all of our speakers for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us today in our webinar. And I would like to also thank our tech team, Santosh-ji and Anuj-ji, for making this webinar so possible. And for all of our viewers, I would like to invite you to our next webinar, Yoga in Depression and Schizophrenia, which is actually on right now. So thank you all for joining us around the world, and welcome and namaste. Thank you.